"What's the matter, Sheriff?" Bobby Pollock asked. "You seem a mite nervous there." Marshal Hull sniffed, but he offered no immediate response. He continued to watch his back trail. He had a feeling in his gut that not everything was right. It seemed that he could see for 100 miles. Few juniper bushes broke the horizon, a butte this way and a mesa that way. Far enough back there, just visible on the eastern horizon, was the butte known as Wagon Mound, a long-time landmark to travelers. Not far from there was Fort Union. Mostly it looked like nothing but flat, dry grassland and blue sky. But Hull knew better. He knew that along his back trail there were 100 hollows and dry washes and low hills and rises, and even deep canyons where rivers would soon run when the rains started. Any day now, the rains would start. If a man wanted to follow another man out here without being seen, Hull knew the terrain allowed for it. Hull now tugged on the black's reins and gave a click of his tongue. The horse lazily started moving again. Bobby Pollock rode a sorrel gelding, his wrists bound in handcuffs, and the handcuffs tied close to the saddle horn. Hull had the lead rope to the sorrel. Pollock had no reins, nor was his saddle fitted with stirrups. His ankles were tied, the rope running under the belly of the horse. He had no ability to dismount and not much ability to control the horse. "You don't have to keep looking, Sheriff. You won't see no one back there," Pollock said, his tone mocking and cocksure. Pollock let loose a chuckle, but he soon lost control of it as it turned into a hacking cough. He bent double in the saddle, coughing for several moments, and hacked something from the back of his throat and spit into the dry dirt. When he regained himself, Bobby Pollock said, "But I promise you this, Sheriff. They're out there." Thomas Hull's expression remained impassive. He was younger than he looked, but the gray hair and the gray whiskers worked together with the weather-beaten face to make the man appear to be something close to half a century. But in truth, he was born on March the 4th, 1837, the same day that Martin Van Buren was sworn in as the 8th President of the United States. So Hull was just now 42 years old. But his general demeanor matched his weather-beaten face and gray hair and older appearance. Thomas Hull was a serious-minded sort of man, without much mirth. Those who knew him well would argue in favor of a kind streak, but it was never near the surface. You had to dig to find that kindness. Ahead of them, mountains broke the horizon. From the distance, they looked like low things, flat-top things, but Hull knew as they continued on, those mountains would grow, and it wouldn't be long before the big mesas and the buttes loomed over the flats. Marshal. The word seemed to come from nowhere without any context, and Bobby Pollock narrowed his eyes at Hull. "How's that?" Pollock asked. "You keep calling me Sheriff. I'm not no sheriff, I'm a town marshal." Pollock shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, don't make no difference. Sheriff, marshal, constable, it's all one and the same, ain't it? I mean, you being a marshal don't mean the rope's gonna be long enough for my feet to reach the ground." "The rope they hang you from?" Hull said. "Nope. I reckon it won't be any longer just because I'm a marshal." "And then I'll call you what I want, and just be glad it ain't worse than sheriff." They went on, maybe another mile. Their destination sat beyond the big mountain in front of them. Los Naranjos, they called it, Mountain of the Orange Trees. The road cut through a narrow gap between Los Naranjos and Ocate Creek that ran at the base of the long tail of a high mesa. Cottonwoods ran along the creek bank. It would be a good place for an ambush. And Thomas Hull could not ignore the nagging sense that they were not alone. He pressed his knee into the black's shoulder to turn the horse a little ways to the south so that he would have a view back to the east. He didn't want to bring their forward progress to a complete halt like he'd done before. And it just wasn't that he didn't want to signal to Pollock that he was worried. Hull also had grown eager to get home. He was tired and stiff from being almost 3 full weeks on the trail. He wanted a decent meal, and he wanted to quit having to look over his shoulder. When he checked back over his shoulder this time, he saw a herd of pronghorn prancing out through the empty grassland. He frowned at them. He'd checked the back trail thoroughly from just a mile back, and there had been nothing there. Now Hull could easily count 7 antelope back there. Anyone trailing him could easily follow along and not be seen. "Hey, Sheriff, I need some shade," Bobby Pollock complained. "Tip of my nose and the back of my neck is both burnt to hell." Hull grunted angrily at the man and twisted slightly in his saddle to look at him. Pollock was a droopy-eyed man with a square jaw and a patchy beard. He wore a little bowler hat. A town hat is what Hull would call it, and in the summer sun it did nothing useful that Hull could see. "You should get yourself a good sombrero, something in straw. Then your shade can go with you. That town hat is useless." Hull tugged the wide-brimmed hat from his own head and held it out where Pollock could see it. "Now this is made of beaver felt. It's a warm hat, but you see here where I poked a couple of holes in the sides? Those holes let the heat escape, and I find make my head nice and cool, even on a hot day. What's important, though, is that the brim is good and wide, and it shades my face and shades my neck. And when I'm out on a trail, I don't complain so much like some people I know." Pollock scoffed at the remark. "You want a complaint? What if this horse spooks at a rattler or something?" Pollock said. "You got my ankles tied and the rope under the horse's belly. If I fall out of this saddle, he'll kill me." Hull chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Don't fall out of your saddle," he advised. Up ahead, about 50 yards in front of them at the top of a low rise, the sun caught the brass receiver of a Henry rifle. Bobby Pollock saw the gleam, and he wrapped his fingers tightly around the saddle horn and squeezed his knees tight into the sides of the sorrel horse, bracing himself. The rifle barked, a tremendous boom breaking the silence of the open grassland. The slug smashed into Marshal Hull's face, and his head snapped back unnaturally on his neck. The black horse spooked and charged, bouncing the Marshal in the saddle, but his feet were caught in the stirrups, and his body flopped bizarrely on the wild horse's back for a moment before one foot came loose and the body fell, and the horse dragged the Marshal's body out past the rise. The sorrel panicked and started to bolt as well. Pollock leaned forward and clutched the saddle horn, calling out, "Whoa, whoa!" He brought the horse under control even before the Marshal's body had flopped from the saddle. 2 men stood up from the crest of the rise, one of them holding a Henry rifle. They ignored the black and started forward to where Pollock was still nervously sitting atop the sorrel. "Well, come and cut me loose before this horse drags me to town," Pollock shouted at the 2 men. The Marshal's body finally kicked loose, but the black did not stop running. One of the men up on the rise watched the horse for a moment, but then lost interest. The man with the Henry rifle now fired 2 shots into the air, and then the 2 of them started down toward Pollock. A moment later, alerted by the 2 shots, a third man, this one mounted, came up from a hollow about a mile away, leading 2 saddled horses. The men cut Bobby Pollock loose. The man with the Henry picked up Tom Hull's badge, torn away from his clothes and lying in the dirt. And then together, the 4 of them rode off,